Hi everyone. Uh, Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. My name is Heitor. I'm from Brazil. I'm Given Policy Co-Coordinator, and today I'm going to talk about you on the thematic of biodiversity and finance as part of the capacity building on the road to COPs 16. So, first of all, it's very important to remember where we are coming from and remember that we are facing a multiple crisis on biodiversity loss, climate change, whose impacts are unequally distributed between different groups and people. And these crises are already inclusive, recognized by stakeholders and markets. One way to see this crisis is exactly through the values approach. And values are very crucial as they are both the reason of the crisis, but also the opportunity to navigate through it. So despite the evidence of nature contributions to people and the value of nature is often not recognized and incorporated into decision-making process. So instead, our political and economic decisions are given priority to a very restrict set of values of nature that are above all associated with instrumental and monetary values. And we are still choosing a few of the contributions that nature provides us instead of trying to understand a more holistic approach and choosing some and among a lot of them at once. So the opportunity is regarding that over time and all over the world, people have developed many ways of understanding and connecting with nature. And therefore, this relationship with nature are being framed into four different categories that are living from, living in, living with, and living as nature. From the more extractive perspective of seeing nature as a natural resource that provides human well-being, and to a more holistic perspective that is embedded in indigenous and local communities, cultures, and traditions, seeing nature as part of themselves, as part of their families, as part of their whole perspective of existence. So when we understand that there are different perspectives on the way that people are connecting with nature and understanding that this connection creates a different set of values, it's important to give a step further and understand that there are many narratives that could represent or at least try to include these diversity values of nature. Some of them might go to the same direction and are proposing transformative change, but other ones are keeping us on the same track and are still forcing us to stay in the same business as usual and the status quo scenario. So understanding, recognizing, incorporating these values means respecting that we are living in a very diverse world with many values, many cosmovisions, and many knowledge systems. So if we want to shift, and if we can shift values that are driven our decision and are driven our financial decisions, then we are also able to try to achieve a more sustainable and just future. So with this introduction, the importance is to consider that to consider for us to keep thinking what narratives, what action, what products, and what values are funded, what financial resources are guaranteeing that people and nature are the center of the decisions, what financial resources are guaranteeing that we are recognizing and incorporating this diverse perspective about people, nature, and the relationship, embedded relationship between nature and people. So if we see the finance discussion, there is a well-recognized biodiversity finance gap of around 700 billion USD dollars annually until 2030 if we want to achieve our needs on protecting, conserving, and supporting sustainable use of nature. So this means that the whole discussion of finance is exactly how to allocate financial resources to close the biodiversity finance gap until 2030. There are many pathways, and here is only important to understand that many pathways means that we have different actors that could be involved, such as domestic, international, private, philanthropy. Also means different types of intervention that could be used, such as finance, which are the current financial instruments that we know as credit, equity, debit. We also have economics interventions, and also business and markets related with value chains, related with risk assessments for companies. And we also need to understand where these interventions are going to be implemented. So they can be directly related to nature, and you're talking about protected areas, but also involving different sectors such as agriculture, fishery, forest, tourism, and even broadly than this, considering human aspects of conservation, which means the whole perspective that include governance, land use tenure, biodiversity, local actions, products, and services that enhance biodiversity. So thinking about how can we connect these different structures is also one of the more innovative and accurate proposals for us to try to think how to create innovative financial instruments that can also create positive effect for people and nature. And finally, there are approaches for us to understand how biodiversity finance is being framed. The first involve creating positive or reducing negative flows. So increasing positive flows mean exactly enhancing the total of resources that are being allocated for conservation, could be both through public or private expenditures, and as I mentioned, also philanthropic and the different actors involved, while reducing focuses on decreasing the financial resources that contribute to biodiversity degradation, again, both for public or private sources. Now there is a giant disbalance between positive flows that goes around 200 million USD dollars per year, compared to negative flows that include negative subsidies and negative investments around 7 trillion USD dollars per year. So see that we are talking about millions on positive and trillions on negative. And the second focus is on the type of approach. Either could be market-based or non-market-based. And market-based approaches on assigning an economic value to nature, facilitating trading or selling these values in public or private markets, which include most of the financial instruments such as green bonds, payment for ecosystem services, different types of credits, markets, and sustainable standards. In the other hand, we also have non-market-based approaches that are closely tied to local biodiversity actions, but cover also a broad spectrum of essential support activities, such as biodiversity conservation, ecological agriculture, environmental education, governance structure, and tenure rights and rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. So for now on, we are really going to go one by one to try to understand exactly how these approaches are being used and how we see this type of framing to indicate us the current problems and also the current opportunities. So first, too much emphasis has been placed on increasing positive financial flows through market-based approaches. And there is a number of challenges and risks that this type of approaches possess, both to ecosystem integrity and human well-being. So evidence have shown on the past decades, and carbon markets definitely are one of the best examples, but also blended finance and voluntary mechanisms, that they have failed to address biodiversity funding gap as it needed on a scale and pace. And in many cases, again, have created harmful impacts on the environment and on social aspects. But even so, there is a growing effort to try to increase financial resources through these market-based approaches. And we can use the biodiversity credits to illustrate, as this is one of the instruments that are most being discussed recently. So how biodiversity credits are defined, there's no consensus, but usually it's considered as a certificate that represents a measure and evidence-based unity of positive biodiversity outcome. So biodiversity credits, they are closely linked to offset schemes and aligned with net gains or net positive approaches, which means that they are directly broken with compensations, where a company or a different actor are harming or destroying biodiversity in some region and some territory, and then are compensating it in some other way. There are also other categories for biodiversity credits to be used for supporting sustainable value chains, to supporting dependencies on nature, or even to create a bundle of products that enhance biodiversity. But the 2 points the main concerns are that one, measure problems. What do we measure when we want to compare it and when to define metrics of ecosystem integrity if you are talking about biodiversity as the whole complex web of life, where the whole complex of interaction between different species that are based on a property location? How to guarantee that even more we are creating a positive outcome when we are talking about comparisons that not included only the instrumental and monetary value perspective, but involve the others intrinsic, the value of nature itself, the relational, the values that we care and steward with nature that are intrinsic to these territories. So how to considering the measurement about these other types of value approaches that people are sharing with nature when you are thinking about compensating it. So there is no metric, there is no indicator, or not even a bundle of indicators that can be used. And not only one or a few metrics are able to measure the complexity of biodiversity now in a way that it can be comparable. And of course, evidence-based is still very complex, as contrafactual models are not being well accepted on carbon markets and would even be more complex and already have a lot of critics when we are thinking about involving this whole complexity in contrafactual methodologies. So very brief, but we have these different concerns to say that biodiversity credits are far away from being aligned with market expectations and operating with a framework of demand, ensuring credibility and transparency. So one, we still do not have a concrete demand for biodiversity credits. The only demand that we have for biodiversity credits are companies that are willing to use it as offsetting and compensated projects that, again, is not an option. And second, the complexity for developing these biodiversity credits are not following science-based methodologies that can really guarantee metrics and contrafactual that create a trust process on the credit and the unity of credit itself. So for now, no time to rush biodiversity credits, and offsetting should not be an option for funding nature. nature is irreplaceable, and there's no space for us to trading the different values of nature. The second thing is regarding the drivers of biodiversity loss, which means that it would be much more effective if we reduce negative financial flows from governance and business that directly harm biodiversity than only focus on increasing positive flow through market-based approach. So there is an urgent need to reform economic and financial sector, as well as guaranteeing regulation of economic and financial sector. So harmful subsidies and harmful investments and other public or private financial flows that are damaging nature, they remain very significant as drivers of biodiversity loss. And financial sector, for instance, has a profound impact on biodiversity as are responsible to provide large amounts of credit and capital for activities that are also contribution to environmental degradation. So as we mentioned, now private are around 5.5 trillion USD dollars, while public is around 1.5 trillion USD dollars. This is the resources that are being allocated. So we're thinking about this structure, we're thinking about regulation, we're thinking about how can we shift this harm to positive resources for nature could be an excellent approach. And third is considering that little to no effort has been made to expand and unlock financial resources for local biodiversity actions, grounded in more market-based approaches. So biodiversity finance really, really must acknowledge the vital role played by indigenous peoples, local communities, and other right holders as key drivers of successful governance and environmental conservation as stewards of the earth. Historically, these groups, they have been under-recognized and insufficiently supported, both in securing their lands, but also on securing their own rights. So since 2020, you can see the grant funding for land tenure rights and stewards of ecosystems has been around only $500 million per year. And if we consider women and youth also as rightful stewards of the earth, there's not even a comprehensive global figure that tracks financial support for these groups. So there is an urgent need for us to also think how to invite a transformative change approach to biodiversity finance, but you're not necessarily talking about market-based approaches, where you're not necessarily talking about the instrumental and monetary values of nature, but how to allocate financial resources for those activities that are stewarding the nature on their own territories and are stewarding both nature and people, and are stewarding this embedded relationship that are sustainable livelihoods. All these introductions are important exactly because here we are talking about our road to COP16. And the Global Biodiversity Framework have a particular target for biodiversity finance, that is the target 19. So you can see that target 19 mentioned all the previous slides that we have briefly discussed, which include the increasing of financial resources from all sources and mobilizing financial resources by 2030. It includes thinking about how to mobilize resources from developed countries to developed countries, how to increase domestic resources, how to leverage private finance, how to stimulate innovative schemes, and how to enhance collective actions and non-monetary-based approaches. So all of these are strategies that are being considered in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And as we have been mentioned, a few of them is gaining more attention than others. And this is a narrative that is very important for us to try to shift, to try to give the right attention for people and nature-centered solutions. So for biodiversity finance negotiations, there are going to be two agenda items that are resource mobilization and a financial mechanism. The main points that are going to be discussed are exactly the review the strategy for resource mobilization to align with the GBF. So the convention itself is proposing a new strategy to guarantee that we are going to be able to fund the global biodiversity framework. We are exploring the current finance landscape to assess gaps and overlaps, which means a study that was conducted to guarantee the current landscape of the biodiversity finance. So what are the gaps, overlaps, challenges, opportunities, and how can we move forward? These two documents are going to be now endorsed or welcomed by the parties. Also, there is exploring proposal for a global instrument on biodiversity finance, where it's being discussed if the current instruments are already enough, if do we need other instruments, and if we need other instruments, how this instrument should be designed, who will host these instruments, and from where these resources are going to be allocated. Also, there's a new proposal to considering the creation of a roadmap for the operationalization of financial resources for target 19F, that is target for non-market-based approaches, which we welcome a lot. And also there are a particular consideration for guidance to the Global Environmental Facility and the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And I will talk about these points one by one right now. All of them, they are being cross-cutted for some of the considerations that we have been carrying on the biodiversity finance agenda, such as direct access to right holders, such as closing gaps, consider inclusivity and accessibility, such as strong concerns about negative impacts on these innovative financial schemes, and the minimal ensure that strong social and environmental safeguards are being considered through the process. So first, reviewing the strategy for resource mobilization to align with the GBF. Now, the strategy has been developed by the Advisory Committee on Resource Mobilization. This strategy is an annex that's going to be discussed and approved. For now, they are fully bracketed, but recommendations, among others, already include very important points, such as the recognitions to need and follow human rights-based approach and gender-responsive approaches, the recognition of the lack of direct access to biodiversity funds by right holders, which include youth, the enforce of social and environmental safeguards when developing and scaling with biodiversity finance, with particular attention to these innovative financial schemes, and the need to undertake studies on guidance on how social and environmental safeguards are being implemented, what lessons and what opportunities for improvements do we have. The second is exploring proposals for a global instrument on biodiversity finance. So as mentioned, this means that we are discussing if there is a need of a new global instrument to fund nature. And now we have basically three main proposals, that is considering the establishment of a new fund that would be under the authority and accountable to the convention, to the COP, or decide to defer, which means that we do not have an answer for now, and we will make this decision later. And there's the proposal that this discussion are going to be postponed by COP17, or decide to establish that the current global instruments on biodiversity finance that are held by the GEF, in particular the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund that I will talk in the next slide, continue to be considered as an institutional structure for the CBD. So now there is a giant discussions exactly if we already have the right instrument, the more accurate instrument, or if we need to develop a new one, or if we need to use a current existing one for the purpose of the implementation of the GBF. So the third point is this considering guidance to the Global Biodiversity Global Environment Facility, including the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. So the GEF is a multilateral family of funds that is dedicated to confront environmental challenge. And in past COP decisions, they requested the GEF to create a special trust fund to support the implementation of the GBF. And it was created the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, the GBFF. GBFF have the aim to scale up finance for the implementation of the GBF. And they have a particular policy of allocation, which includes 36% to SIDS and LDCs, that are the small islands and development islands and the low development countries, 25% through international financial institutions, and an aspirational 20% to indigenous peoples and local communities. And the governance structure now counts with a council where we have indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth as observers. The main problem is that the GEF now is a country-driven process, which means that countries are the only one that are able to access resources, and these resources are on access through an implementation agencies. And here are a few of the implementation agencies that the GEF have. So because of this structure, we have problems both with a lot of developing countries that do not have the capacity to access these resources, or they don't have implementation agencies that are working with them to be able to access these resources. And also there is a huge gap between the GEF, the resources itself, and us as implementers for grassroots local biodiversity actions to get access of the resources. There are no way for directly access right now for indigenous peoples, local communities, human and youth in the GBFF, or a huge amount of financial resources that could be accessed through the GEF. We need to access through different agencies when inserted in a particular project that are submitted by implementation agencies with a country. So this gap means that resources that we are receiving, they do not counting us in the decision-making process. They are not counting us in the design of the projects, and resources are very few when they reach the ground, because there are a cascade until reach the ground. So these are only a few of these problematics. And because of these and other questions that are more bureaucratic aspects, they are considering guidance to the GEF and considering guidance to the GBFF. So it includes a report that GEF did on how they are responding to the Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets, and also still bracketed recommendations on how COP16 should adopt a framework for the new cycle of projects of the GEF. That's GEF 9 is the new cycle of how they will use, or how is the strategy that they're going to guarantee how resources are going to be allocated for the next 4 years, that is aligned with the end of the GBF at 2030. And suggest also to continue to support partnerships and explore ways to further improve, facilitate access, and increase directly funded to right holders, which includes also youth. So I thank you very much. This was a brief discussion, and I will be glad if you have doubts or anything, or and would like to talk about this topic. Thank you very much, and hope to see a lot of you in Cali. Thank you.